So thank you all again for being here this morning for our training on navigating therapeutic behavioral consultation. In just a moment, I'm going to pop up the learning goals, or perhaps better said, the content and information that we hope to expose you to as we go through. Barry, Jason, and I are going to do an overview on the areas that are listed on these. So let me toggle over to that really quickly before I get into full screen mode, so you can see what these learning goals are for the day. Today is a high-level overview of many different administrative components of the service. It's not possible to do a deep dive on every single aspect of the service, the regulations, provider manual, et cetera. We're trying to essentially give a general flavor of the many different components that are part of the service or could intersect with the service, and provide information on where you can find resources specific to the service on DMAS website, DBHDS website, and other resources that we pull together. And I've got to be clear about this too. The training that we're providing, it doesn't supplant regulations, guidance documents, provider manuals, anything like that. So anybody that's participating in the training, use the recording in the future, please know and understand that you've got to reference and adhere to the regulations, manuals, guidance documents, et cetera, to guide your provision of services, your documentation requirements, billing, or any other aspects of delivering and navigating this service. At this point, I'm going to go ahead and kick it over to my colleague, Jason Perkins, to talk about a couple of slides here.
Well, first of all, good morning, everyone. This is Jason Perkins with DMAS. It is amazing to see so many people on this training. I would be amiss if I did not also give Nathan a big shout out. He's so wonderful to give us so much credit, but I want to confess to everyone on this call that he was the superhero who pulled this all together. So Nathan, we appreciate the kudos, but we must return it in kind, because this would have never happened without your hard work. So thank you as well. I will also very quickly say it's wonderful to see some familiar faces. Once upon a time, I went through the PBS facilitation training. I don't see her. I will say I saw Emily Himboldt pop up for a moment. Blast from the past. Emily was my PBS facilitator mentor once upon a time. So I'm not sure if you remember me, Emily, but it was very good and exciting to see you pop in here.
Oh, hey, Jason. I did. Good to see you.
See, she remembers me. I feel good. I've made an impression.
Of course.
Thanks, Emily.
Sure.
So very quickly, these first 3 slides kind of give you a very brief introduction to what it means to enroll as a DMAS Medicaid provider, specifically if you're going to be providing this service to the DD waivers as a DD waiver therapeutic consultative provider. The first step to becoming a provider with DMAS, if you've not already gone through this before, is to utilize the website that we have on the slide. Please follow the links as you go through the website. We have done a massive overhaul to the system. We effective April, I think it was the 14th of 2022, we rolled out the Medicaid Enterprise System, or MES, which is now the user interface for most of these processes. The link you see here will take you, once you click on the new providers can enroll or check the enrollment status here, that link will take you into the system to be set up as a Medicaid waiver provider. I also do want to quickly point out, you'll see there on the same page, it says providers, the provider resources tab, where you can see Medicaid bulletins, memos, provider manuals, and downloadable forms. Please make use of that as often as possible. I also want to remind what Nathan said earlier. No matter, this is just an overview. The meat and potatoes of what you will be doing are captured through the Medicaid manuals, the regulations, and various memos and bulletins. Please make use of those whenever necessary. Next slide, please, Nathan. This is an important one for me. When you're doing the Medicaid provider participation agreement, enrollment as a Medicaid waiver provider, one of the things you're going to be seeing is select the service you plan to provide and to verify your credential. The reason this is important, when you're doing this process, please only submit what is requested. Many of you may have multiple credentials, association memberships, etc. If enrollment needs additional information, they will reach out to you to request it. What we do request when you're doing an enrollment, if you are a BCBA, if you are a PBS facilitator, if you are a BCABA, please include that information in your participation agreement application. And when you submit the appropriate material, please only submit what is requested. The reason I say this is because we are seeing some problems in our system where when people are submitting more than what is requested, please always keep in mind that the people who are doing this are technology people. They are not clinical people. They're just monitoring these processes. They do not always know the nuances or differences between the various material you may be submitting, and it causes confusion on what you're supposed to be enrolled as. So please, when you're doing the participation agreement, only submit what is requested and what you have filled in. If they need more, they will reach out to you and request it. Next slide, please, Nathan. And last but not least, for these first 3 slides, I feel certain that Dee Thomas at DBHDS would come over and smack me if I did not stress this to everyone. Before you can enter WAMS, which is our waiver management system where you will do your service authorization requests, you cannot get into WAMS, you cannot request access to WAMS until you have done the Medicaid participation enrollment. That process must be completed and then transitioned over through an automated process into WAMS before she can do anything for you. So what I will say is once you have done the work through the Medicaid system to become an enrolled provider and submitted your credentials, all required paperwork, and you have been issued that magical MPI API number to move forward, then you need to go to this website, hover over the Getting Help for Provider Development. It will take you to a toolkit for prospective DD waiver providers that will walk you through what you need to get into WAMS, request access, etc. If you do that first, WAMS will not know what to do. They will not know who you are. They will not be able to grant you access. They will send you right back to Medicaid. So I always tell people, before you do this step, make sure you have completed the first step to become an enrolled provider. Then you will follow this next slide in order to become enrolled through WAMS, to start doing your individual support plans, to submit your service authorization requests, and etc. That is all I have made for these first 3 slides.
I think Barry's up next. Go ahead, Barry.
Okay, turn my video back on. Hi, I'm Barry Sieber, again, Community Resource Consultant. So the toolkit that Nathan was just referring to is on the DBHS website. He directed you to that. That toolkit does have all the information you need. The way we designed it was to include even thinking about becoming a provider, some things to think about. And then it walks you through all the steps as far as if it were a licensed service, which you guys are not licensed by DBHDS, but other services on through the DMAS processes, then the regulations and the D waiver manual. So it's just volumes of information in there. I suggest you take a look at it, just kind of do a check. Be sure when you're in the regulations and the manual that you don't just go to the area that has your service listed. So therapeutic consultation, you're looking all that. There are other pieces in the regulations that have other requirements that are across all services or a number of services that are not listed specifically for a service under that service listed in the regulations. So you need to read all the regulations, not just the section that pertains to your services. Next slide, please. So for WAMS, the waiver management system, the key is getting access to it to start. And then on the home page, if you scroll down a little bit, you'll see there are training resources within the system itself. So you have webinars in there, you have guidance documents in there that you can walk through. It's very well set up based on the Community Services Board section, and there's a provider section. Once you get your account, you can start looking at that. And as far as community resource consultants, the team I'm on within the CR team team 2, which is the provider teams. We work with all the providers in specific regions. I happen to be region 5, which is the Tidewater area. If you need to know who's your TSC, you can go to our website or DBHDS website and go to provider development, and our listing is there of who is the CRC for your particular region. Just look for team 2. That would be the team provider team. We provide consultation as far as content that goes into WHAM. As far as the system itself, we do not provide consultation. There's a WHAM's helpline that you contact for that purposes, or I really recommend going to those tutorials. I'll just be straight with you. I'm not a high technology person, but I was able to follow those guides pretty easily because there's a lot of screenshots. It's very well set up. Next slide, please. So once you're up and running and you're ready to kind of put your shingle out there and say, hey, I'm ready to accept people into services, you're going to need to consider where you're providing these services. The website, DBHDS, you can see the link there. You can go to the list of community services boards, find the boards that are in there that you're serving, and make contact with them. The suggestion is when you contact them, ask to speak to one of the DD waiver or DD support coordinator supervisors. Now, some boards have multiple supervisors and managers, but you're going to want to speak to that person. They're the ones that are going to pass that information along to the support coordinators. Your referrals will be coming from the support coordinators, case managers, whatever term you use and they use, to you to say, I've got a person, they're interested in therapy consultation services. Are you able to provide those? So you're going to want to make contact with them, and you may want to check in with them every once in a while, just remind them that you're out there, especially when you have availability, because their role is to offer choice. So they're going to have multiple providers that they offer. They're going to go and look and see, here's someone that has indicated to me that they have availability. So that would increase the chance that you're going to get a contact. Next slide, please. So there were some others that are involved with this. Sometimes Nathan too gets an email from providers for therapy consultation behavior supports. We suggest that you go to the either VAVA site if that's appropriate for you and get your information into that site, or make sure that your information is on the PBSF roster. Because when we get a contact then from support coordinators looking for a provider, these are the sites we're going to send them to. Right? And the VAVA site, I will note, for DD waiver has a specific method to screen for those providers that have DD waiver services. So you want to be sure that you check that off if you are providing those services under the DD waiver. Next slide. When you get contacted by a support coordinator, they're going to suggest that they have a person that's interested in your services. Again, they're going to offer choice because that's required. So they're going to be able to talk to multiple providers. Once you accept that person and say, yes, I can provide these services for this individual in this area, get back with that support coordinator. If you're the provider that that person chooses, then the support coordinator can open up a section in WHAMS for you to start the authorization process. Next slide. So for authorization purposes, you're going to enter a part 5 in the system. There's a specific template that we have that you can use. We have a sample, I'll get to that later, of the first 180-day requests. You're then going to request, how many hours will it take you to complete the service? That's your best guess as a professional. Is that I think it's going to take this amount of hours to do this. Once you're approved, you'll get that notification from WHAMS, and you can check your status at any time, and you can begin to offer services. Now, do not start services before you get that authorization. If you do, You're being very generous because you're giving away for free. You cannot back bill. Wait for the authorization to be approved. Next slide. Constant Contact is our means and is primarily out of our Office of Provider Development at DBHDS. But we get information from a variety of sources that we will share through Constant Contact. You're going to want to register for this. It's very simple. You can use this link. You can go to that prospective provider packet on the website. It's in there. Once you click on it, all you do is enter your email address, click submit, and it's done. You're on the list. Then you're going to get information about upcoming training, updates to manuals and regulations, and a variety of other updates. Especially with COVID, we had a lot of updates were coming about to flexibilities that went with it. The provider roundtable is announced on there. We're getting ready to have another one of those. If you're not familiar with the provider roundtable, it is where the CRC team has a very long agenda. We address a lot of information of current events, current situations, and information. It's good for you to join those provider roundtables. We get upwards of 800 and some people because we're doing it statewide through Zoom. So we get a lot of people coming on to those. I think that was it for me. The next slide for someone else, I believe.
I believe it's back to Jason here at DMAS.
All right.
Now, the topic of these next 3 slides says billing information, but please understand this is a painfully quick overview of some very just basic tips. I will stress that billing itself is, of course, a very complex process. There will be, as you go through the website, there are a variety of help options for you to utilize to kind of get better at this. So I want to make that right up front that we do not have enough time to do a full training just on billing. So again, this is just some tips and helpful info. First things first is always make sure you kind of keep abreast of the current rates in the DD waiver system. Some of you may be, well, you just recently had a waiver rebase that did a fairly significant increase to a majority of the DD waiver rates. The current link for the rates as of now can be found at the link here on the slide. Also on our DMAS website, we have some billing tutorials. These are actually, I think, somewhat helpful. I would encourage you as you're doing the process to take some time to start watching these. They kind of give you the basics of what goes into completing a standard Medicaid claim submission. The next link is one that I always tell people can be like a little cheat sheet for you. Appendix D is part of the newly approved DD waiver manual we've just got out for official consumption just in the last couple of months. Appendix D is the dedicated section that walks you through the service authorization process for each service. Basically, it's sort of an informal business rule protocol that we expect DBHDS to follow in their SA process. It's a great tip for you all to be looking through. These are the things, these are the steps that DBHDS service authorization go through in order to determine the accuracy and validity of the service authorization. So it's a great little, I think it's kind of a peek behind the curtain, so to speak, for all of you all to be able to see. As far as billing, I always tell people billing is kind of at your own leisure. You can bill daily, weekly, or monthly. I've known of people billing multiple months all at once. It's totally your call. All I will stress, and I cannot stress this enough, is the classic timely filing rule here at Medicaid. You must bill for a service rendered within 365 days. If you do not do that, we will not pay the claim. Please, oh please, whatever you do, I don't care if you do it daily, weekly, monthly, bi-monthly, you do it on the holidays, I don't care. Just please make sure you do not go past 365 days, because we will not pay that claim. It's due to a timely filing expectation. A little trick on your claims. Do not use decimal points. Many of you are clinicians. You're probably LCSWs, LPCs, BCAs. You're so used to this ingrained diagnostic codes having these multiple numbers with decimal points. Those decimal points don't work in the system. Don't use them. For example, if the code is 484.0, please just do 484.0. Our system doesn't like decimal points. It gives it a headache. Please make sure when you're doing a claim that, as Barry said very well, make sure you've got that approved service auth in hand, in queue, you've seen it, you've printed it, you've put it to memory, because you need to use the approved service authorization number that was generated in WAMS when you submit a claim. Please make sure you're using the correct service authorization number when you're submitting your claim, or it will get rejected. Next slide, please, Nathan. Something we call the rounding rule here in the system. Our system only wants and will only really accept whole numbers when you do your submission. So you may monitor your monthly work in a variety of different methods, and you may end up at the end of a month having 38.55 hours worth of work. Now, remember, we don't like decimal points. So what we tell providers to do is follow the rounding rule. Now, the current iteration of the rounding rule can be found in the Chapter 5 manual of the CCC Plus waiver manual. It just recently got updated in the Chapter 5 version. We will be adding this exact same language to our Chapter 5 of the DD waiver manual soon. It's also available in a Medicaid memo that's applicable for DD waiver if you need it, but it's the exact same language. And it's basically that only whole hours can be billed if an extra 30 minutes or more of care are provided over the course of a calendar month. The next highest hour can be billed. If less than 30 minutes, the next lower number of hours must be billed. It's once you get used to it, it's fairly self-explanatory. Just remember that the system wants whole numbers. It doesn't want partial numbers. There's a list of billing code errors and resolutions we found at the PDF here at the bottom of the screen. Like with everything else we're kind of offering you, please take the time to familiarize yourself with that. It can be very helpful. Next slide, please, Nathan. And last but not least, once you've done all these magical steps to get enrolled as a Medicaid provider, you will also gain access to what we call the PRSS portal as part of the MES system. Now, when you go through all these different setups, this is where you'll go to do your billing. You will go to do your claims, and let me rephrase it. It depends how you're choosing to do your billing. If you're doing your billing yourself, you will go through this process to do your claims in the system. We don't really have any screenshots of that. That gets a little into the weeds of PHI, but I will say that if you have issues with this, once you get set up, please utilize those help resources. Again, I know the billing can be overwhelming. We want to help you. If you have some support needs that you cannot reach resolution, my email is very easy to track down, like most of us with the state. It's just jason.perkins@dmas.virginia.gov. I can't hide from you. If you need help, reach out to me. That's all I think I have, Nathan.
All right, I'm going to turn it over to Barry for a couple of the slides before I get my turn here.
All right, I was having trouble turning my video back on. I want to give a shout out to Jason. We've known each other a long time, and I was very pleased when he moved over to DMAS. He is a great resource, and I've found he is very good about getting information and getting back with you. So I always appreciate that, Jason. So I mentioned part 5 earlier. There's an initial part 5 for the first 180 days of authorization. Basically, that's your kind of assessment period that you're doing. So this sample, and this is a screenshot of it, is basically if you looked at the regs of the manual, it's the information out of there put into a part 5. So you would use this one, obviously change the information about the person in here. And if you had anything else specific, you could put it into this, but this gives you the framework of what to do. The next authorization, there's a provider guide for those services for therapeutic consult behavior supports. I recommend you get a copy of that. You can, I hate to say this with 170 some people on here, but it'd be easier for you to just email me because I can send you this sample, and I can also send you that guide, which will help you with your authorization process in those part 5s. If you run into any issues with content concerns with the part 5s, that again is my job for region 5 and the other teammates that I have on team 2 in their region. So you could contact them if it's not me. Next slide. This comes up quite a bit, the therapy consultation schedule, because you have to have a general schedule of supports. And keep in mind that title, it is a general schedule of supports. It's not an absolute. Especially with your services, you never know when you may be called and may be needed because someone's having an issue that you happen to be available and you could go over and meet with this person and do some more assessment, do some more observation. It is permissible for therapy, consultation, behavior supports to provide direct intervention in these situations. So you're using your professional opinion on what are the projected number of hours needed. You're just putting them across the schedule on there. It may change, that's okay. But just basically use your professional opinion. These are how many hours in a particular week on a particular day that I may be working with this person. I think that's it for me, and pass it off to, I guess, Nathan.
All right. Thank you, everybody. So I'm going to talk maybe for about 10, 12 minutes-ish about regulations, not deep, but just to let you know where they are. I'm going to talk a little bit about quality assurance, and I'm going to talk about the authorization types that we have for this service. So just right out of the gate, here is the link to the Code of Virginia that outlines the regulations. You can go and check that out, and you should, so that you know what the expectations are for this particular service. Also, the provider manual with the updated link is here as well. And again, just to be clear, we will make the slide deck available to folks as soon as possible subsequent to the training. So I hope nobody is vigorously trying to type out these links. We'll make sure that you get them. The provider manual is really important as it gives supplemental information to the regulations that's going to be extremely helpful to you as a provider for this service. Again, as I noted at the beginning, I'm not going to read the entirety of the slides, but I just wanted to put this up for the allowable activities because we do get questions about these. Now would be a good time if you're looking at them and you have questions to go ahead and type those questions into the chat so that we can summarize those and put answers out in an FAQ after the training. But the key takeaway really for this is that I want folks to know where the regulations are, and that they need to be familiar with and adhere to the regulations, and also to the DBHDS/DMAS practice guidelines for behavior support plans. So again, just to reiterate, go ahead and type any questions that you have about allowable activities or any other content that we're presenting today as we go through. I'm going to do a quick spin on the 3 types of authorizations for the service. Just looking at the guest list, I recognize a lot of names for folks that have been in trainings previously that I've done, and my colleague Sharon Bonaventura have been a part of as well and presented this information. So I think some of it might be old hat, but I'll just do a quick summary of these 3 different authorization types for this service. First off, what you've got here on your visual is a breakdown of the different authorizations and the timeframes and required documents. This is from page 15 of the DBHDS DMAS practice guidelines for behavior support plans. So that's the last page on that document. It gives the same visual. And again, it's just outlining the time frame and then what's expected minimally to be able to obtain a service authorization. So make sure that you're aware of that. This rubric, I hope, is helpful to folks so that they can understand what they need to supply to get that service authorization. So to get a teeny bit more in depth, the initial authorization request, that's when somebody is new to your program. So you're working with that individual new to your program. And as Barry mentioned, and I think the phrase that he said encapsulates it pretty well, it's really the assessment period. It's where you're going through, you're getting to know the person, you're doing your assessment, and then by the conclusion of this 180-day period, the behavior support plan has been developed. So to obtain this particular authorization to do that work, you need to submit a Part 5 that's going to have minimally that a FBA is going to be completed, that a behavior plan is going to be completed, and what the plan is to begin to obtain some data during that 180-day authorization period. Next up is the secondary authorization request. So that comes immediately after that first initial 180-day authorization request. So when you get done creating the behavior plan, you've done the FBA, you've got your data collections method set up, you're going to need to include this information in your submission to obtain a secondary authorization request, which should go, I think in most circumstances, until the date of the individual's next ISP meeting. So you're going to need a part 5, of course, and in that it's going to outline, or need to outline, better said, a request or description of training for supporters or stakeholders for that person, measurable objectives related to the behaviors that we'd want to see more of, and then the behaviors that are targeted for deceleration. In a previous training, I talked about the SMART acronym that's out there. That's a good guide for making sure that you're coming up with very clear and objective benchmarks, objectives, goals, whatever you prefer, to call them. But those particular SMART objectives, as I like to call them, need to be in that section of the part 5. You're going to submit your behavior support plan, your FBA, and then also any data that's been gathered thus far to obtain that secondary authorization request. And then third in line would be that annual authorization request. So that would be the time from the secondary to the next ISP, or if you're carrying over with somebody for multiple ISP years. So maybe you've been working with the person for 2 or 3 years, and then you're just in an annual authorization request cycle. The deliverables for that are essentially as follows: that your part 5 is going to have that plan for training, and then the measurable benchmarks similar to the secondary authorization. At this point, you're going to need to submit data in an acceptable form. So for behaviorally analytic services, it's typically a line graph display, and then a brief summary statement needs to be included somewhere in the documentation that's been provided. The current behavior support plan, along with the functional behavior assessment results, it's up to you if you want it to be 2 separate documents, or you just want to have them incorporated into one document. Totally up to you, just as long as it's there and it's very clear as to what it is. And then documentation of any training that was completed within the most recent review period. In a previous training, we talked about what we would be looking for minimally for the training. And I think it's pretty basic and logical, but I'll just kind of spell it out really quickly. So what the training was, who the recipients were. You don't have to name them. You could if you wanted to, but it could say, the family, it could say the group home manager, whomever. You could also, put the names of the individuals if you wanted to. The date of the training that occurred, that's the minimal expectation for noting your training documentation. And then I'll do my best here to summarize what's noted in the italics. Essentially what this is calling out is that for folks that are carrying over multiple years, so they're in their 2nd or 3rd year of therapeutic consultation behavioral services, we're looking for some type of statement of validity related to the original functional behavior assessment. Or if the treatment data suggests that there needs to be a reevaluation or a reassessment, that hours are requested for additional FBA. And that information is outlined in the practice guidelines for behavior support plans as well. Nice segue. Okay, so moving on to those practice guidelines, here's the link that you can get those from. It's posted on Town Hall. What that outlines in particular are a couple of things. The first dozen or so pages are really related to getting into more granular information about what's in the regulations. So it really could be considered, I suppose, a guidance document for the regulations for this particular service. So the regulations outline 12 different content areas, minimal content areas. There could be more based off of your own professional opinion, but minimally, we're looking for these 12 content areas for behavior support plans. So I'm not going to list them all, but a couple of them, I think maybe in order actually, are demographics, history rationale, person-centered information, functional behavior assessment. So literally it spells that out in the regs. But the practice guidelines get into that level of detail to say, well, for demographics, of course we want to have the person's name, their date of birth or their age, diagnostic information, who's making decisions on the plan, those types of things. So those practice guidelines break down in more specificity what those minimum elements are that kind of roll up, if you will, to the content areas that are outlined in the regulations. And then in addition to that information, which is in a tabled format, so hopefully it's pretty easy to navigate through and easy on the eye for the reader. But additionally, there are 3 little literature review style snippets about positive behavior support and behavior planning, person-centered thinking, and planning in behavioral services, and then incorporating a trauma-informed care approach to behavior support planning. And then lastly, on page 15, what I mentioned a couple of slides ago is this brief summary table on authorization types. And we use the practice guidelines as the method, if you will, to evaluate behavior support plans and the quality of behavior support plans that are penned through this particular service. So more on that. I want to talk just a little bit as I close out my section about the quality assurance component that we're completing here at this point. So there's this acronym is listed here in the header, BSPARI, and it stands for Behavior Support Plan Adherence Review Instrument. It's a tool that we created internally at DBHDS that uses a weighted scoring system to measure the overall adherence of assessment and behavioral programming to the aforementioned practice guidelines and regulations. So as I mentioned in a previous training, just really quickly to recap that information, what's the etiology of this? So if you've looked at the settlement agreement, there are some pretty clear metrics or what are referred to as compliance indicators that outline expectations for this service. Some of them say things such as that the permanent regulations would be updated, paraphrasing here, by the way, but the permanent regulations would be updated to include content areas for behavior plans, that we would promulgate practice guidelines. And then based off of those first 2, that we would find some method to determine adherence to those practice guidelines. So that's why we created this instrument, and that's why we've set up this quality assurance system, if you will. The settlement agreement isn't the only reason. It might be considered potentially the teeth, if you will, but the most important thing really is that everybody that's a Virginian that's receiving this service, regardless of whether they live on the Eastern Shore in Bristol or anywhere in between, is getting behavioral services through this service that meet the minimum expectations that we've outlined, regardless, again, of course, of where they live or the practitioner that's delivering those services. So that's why we set the expectations to be hopefully pretty clear, and then also why we're trying to set up and moving forward with this quality assurance or feedback system. So the tool itself, again, it uses a weighted scoring system. There are 40 possible weighted points. When we cooked it up, we allotted points based off of the criticality of the content area or particular minimum elements as to their presence or absence, either helping the plan sink or swim, for lack of a better way to put it. Overall efficacy might be a better term. What we have for a cutoff for a passing score essentially is 34 points. That's our minimum adherence to the practice guidelines, and that equates to an 85% approximately of those weighted points being present. We've set up a feedback process as part of this because it's important when we do these reviews that they're not just in a file. Somewhere people need to see the results so that they know what's in adherence with the practice guidelines and the regulations, and also areas that could be improved upon. So what that looks like is a brief virtual meeting, usually about 30 to 45 minutes with the behaviorist and me or one of my colleagues at DBHCS that does these reviews. And we send encrypted copies of the tool, the BSPARI, in advance so that the behaviorist has time to look at them and they can formulate any questions that they have about the BSPARI reviews that have occurred. And when we do these, we're trying to highlight trend areas that have been in adherence and trend areas not in adherence. Quite honestly, typically the behaviorists that I've interacted with at this point, they usually just want to know about areas that they can improve upon. I think it's probably pretty clear about when they look at the BSPARI results, what's on point, I guess, and they're more interested in the areas that they might modify going forward to move those plans into adherence if they're slightly shy. So as we've said in past trainings, it's not a deep dive on the person or their circumstances. It's looking at the presence or absence of these core and also minimum elements. It's on a Microsoft Excel document, this instrument, and it's got 2 tabs on it. One of them is the actual scoring rubric that just says BSPARI, and the other one is a resources tab, and I'll give a screenshot of that just in a moment. And lastly, for this slide, the idea is that with the feedback process, some component of this recipe of creating expectations, delivering trainings, having a tool that has automated resources in it, and then the feedback process, some component of that, we hope it is going to make it such that any plans that are not in adherence are going to be in adherence in subsequent iterations, and or that areas that are missing in one plan, they may be missing in another plan for the same behaviorists, and then the feedback would be generalized such that both plans, even if they both weren't reviewed, that you could take that information and then generalize to make adjustments for areas that were missing and also maintain areas that were in adherence. And at this point, we're seeing nice improvement, and which we outlined in a training that we did back in August. So lastly, I think for my little component at this point is just a little screenshot of the tool. This is one section on functional behavior assessment. It doesn't include the component on hypothesized functions, but it's got these minimum elements here for what we would be looking for. And there's one area that has an X to it. It's the first part, if you will, of the 4-term contingency. So this is a screenshot that's from the BSPARI tab. I'm not sure if you can see my mouse, but I'm hovering over it. And then the area that's below that has this row that's outlined in red, that's from the resources tab. So again, there's 2 tabs on the instrument. If you click over on the resources tab, we have it set up with conditional formatting such that any area that's marked with an X on the BSPARI tab, on the resources tab, it's going to highlight in red, and it's going to highlight these different resources that might be helpful for a brush up or to contact literature that you haven't seen in the past. The idea is just to give additional resources for relevant areas. And also we made it such that you could see the resources for areas that were in adherence as well, because we wanted to make those resources just available. So you could click on those. It will take you directly to the digital object identifier for that article. Some of them are just web resources and they're not articles. A couple of them are book chapters, but you could click on it. It would take you there. Minimally, you'd be able to get that abstract. But for some of them, they're not behind a paywall, and it'll take you directly to the article itself. I believe I'm turning it back over to Barry one more time at this point.
Yes, and I apologize, I'm not going to be able to turn my video on because I'm getting an unstable connection message just because I live in a very rural area. So I apologize for that. So some other paperwork, and this kind of gets into looking at various places within the regulations and the DD waiver manual. So you have quarterly and annual reviews that have to be done if you are providing your service over a 3-month period. Sometimes, I don't think it's very common, you may complete your services within a 2-month period. Probably not likely. Then you'd go ahead and just do a final quarterly at that point and close out the service. But otherwise, you're doing it every 3 months. It needs to align with the individual ISP dates, meaning the support coordinator already has their part 5 because they're required to do one too. So their quarterly dates are based on when they started that part 5. Your quarterly dates need to align with theirs. So you may start the services, your first quarter may be only 2 months in order to line up with their quarterly that's due in that period. It may be 1 month. It needs to line up at that point. You're going to obviously keep contact notes in your documentation to make sure that's done and available, because there will be audits potentially for your information. They're going to take a look at those notes. You can see chapter 1 of the provider protection requirements. Page 3 is where you look for information about what needs to be in those notes. Then any disposition summaries. So you're stopping services, you're ending services. There's a way that you need to document that. Take a look at chapter 6, the quality management utilization reviews. these chapters, by the way, are so page 27, and then disposition summaries, chapter 4, covered services and limitations, page 152. Other pieces like filing documentation requirements, there's in chapter 6, page 20, you have business professional records and individual records. Again, emphasizing don't just go to your
Uh-oh. Did we lose him?
It looks
think
like,
we lost Barry, Nathan.
all right, give me just 1 second.
He'll probably be right back.
Did I mention that my connection was unstable?
You get this cool cyborg
sorry
voice
about that.
going on, so keep it up. You're okay, Barry.
Okay, I thought it's sorry. This is a preference for living in country, and it has its downfall sometimes, especially with the internet signal. I apologize for that. So, and there are links in the initial authorization sample of 180 days to get a copy of that. Or again, you can just email me and I'll be happy to send it to you. Now, if every single one of you emails me, give me a few days to get it to you. It's going to be a lot of return emails. All right, next slide. So when you complete your quarterly reviews, you're going to upload those in WAMs. But you're required to submit that information to the support coordinator. In order to do that, you need to make sure it gets uploaded into the correct section. So what you're going to look for is you're not putting it in the section ISP attachments. Okay, it's going in the person's information section. If you've not been in WAMs, it's probably like I'm confused about this. Once you get in WAMs, it'll make sense to you. Make sure it's going under person's information attachment. That's where the support coordinator is going to look for that information. If they don't find it there, you put it somewhere else, they're going to think that it's not done and they'll be contacting you. You as a provider have a 10-day grace period from the end of that quarter. You have 10 days to complete your quarterly review and get it into the system. Next slide. So other paperwork and information, this is a tip sheet from WAMS, is in a section for therapeutic consultation services being entered. In that code, there's 1 or 2 codes, you'll see that on the screen that you would enter. When you enter that code, that box is going to pop up and ask you, is this a behavioral consultation? So clearly you would check yes at that point on that. It's part of our data collection services. Next slide. If you use these tips, these are throughout it's within WAMS on that home page. Scroll down a little bit, you'll see a lot of tips and sheets to guidance documents that can help you a lot. Human rights regulations, you need to take a look at those and adhere to all the human rights regulations. You should have policies related to those. We have a whole separate office, human rights. If you have a question about human rights regulations, you can call me, but I'm going to send you to your human rights advocate. That's their wheelhouse, not mine. I know a little bit, but they are the experts in it. So if you have any questions along those lines after you read any of these documents, like the restrictions and everyday freedoms, please contact your human rights advocate for advice and guidance. Next. Competencies, insurance, and tests for DSPs and supervisors. You can take a look at those. There are behavioral competencies and autism competencies. You as therapy consultation providers are not required to do these. You may be asked to provide training regarding behavior competencies, autism competencies. There's a list of professionals that can provide the training, and there's a list of topics that have to be covered under either of these trainings, behavior, autism. You cannot bill for those services under your therapeutic consultation behavior supports. You would need to contract with a provider as far as what you're going to charge them to provide this training. If you have any questions about them, you can contact one of us on team 2.
Nathan, I guess this is our part.
I think we've reached that point, Christy.
Okay. Hi, I'm Christy Vanko, and as Nathan said before, I'm the Administrative Director for the Virginia Association for Behavior Analysis, but I've also been delivering this service since 2014. However, Darcy Creech is gonna help me. We're gonna kind of do this together, and she, I would say, is more of the queen of therapeutic consultation. She's definitely very well versed in all of this stuff. One of the things I asked for with this training was kind of a checklist or a start to finish guide on what to do as a therapeutic consultant. And part of that was, I know that at least for other behavior analysts, this is not the only service we provide. Maybe PBS facilitators, this might be the only service you provide. And so it's easier to keep those regulations together. But for behavior analysts, we provide services for Medicaid and commercial, and I don't know what you all do. I know I have a lot of different guidelines, and sometimes it's difficult to remember all the different places to find that information. So hopefully this checklist will help you as you are doing cases, and remember, oh yeah, I've got to do that quarterly, or I've got to do those contact notes, or how to that respect. So I'm going to go through these slides, and then Darcy is going to help me with anything that I miss, which I'm sure will be quite a bit. So the first thing, as was said earlier, you're going to contact the local CSB. CSB stands for Community Services Board, to present your services and obtain referrals. Actually, if you look back in this deck for slide 9, and I think it was Jason who talked about that. Might have been Barry, I don't remember exactly, but somebody gave you information on how to go get those referrals. So that's kind of the very beginning. And I've noticed that once you sort of had a relationship with a support coordinator, or that you will then start to get probably more cases. I have developed relationships with support coordinators throughout the years, but that's who it's actually coming from, or the case manager or the support coordinator. And you do need to know that person. Go ahead.
And Darcy speaking, just to answer a question, somebody asked how often the CSBs are updated, the list. The CSBs, there's I think 40 in the state, that doesn't change. Each CSB is charged with updating their own website. So I have a feeling they're not very updated. And what Christy and I talked about is suggesting that you call the main numbers and ask for the support coordination or case management supervisor. That's at least what we do. And then we just start emailing and calling till we can get a response.
Yeah. So then you're going to ask for the referral form and the intake paperwork from the support coordinator. Things that you might get are the CIS, and that's what sort of evaluates the individual. And it's a long story, but it kind of puts them in levels in the waiver. And of course, we need to maybe just to back up and look at a 50,000-foot view. The people who are receiving these services from us are waiver recipients, and that's for the family and individual support waiver and the community living waiver. At this time, the building independence waiver does not provide for, unfortunately, therapeutic consultation. I think it would be great if it did, but that's another issue. So you would have an individual who has one of those waivers. If they don't, they cannot receive this service. The service is not available to them. So you would ask for those paperwork just to get kind of an idea of what's going on, the assessments, the psychological report, the VIDEs, their individual support plan, so that that's just part of your initial, work. You're going to complete a service authorization, a plan for supports, and then upload the required documents and WAMs. And we're going to spell this out a little bit more in the coming slides. Then you'll provide your services. So you've got that in there as outlined in the manual. And it's really good to get to know the different things that you can do as a therapeutic consultant, because it's different than what you would do with traditional ABA, or traditionally with ABA. There's no such thing as traditional ABA. It's different than what you would do with services such as Medicaid or commercial. So it's good to understand what it is that is included in that list.
And if I can throw in, I think a lot of people have a lot of questions about what's allowable, what you can do, what you can't do, how to write a contact note and all, but there is a lot of flexibility with that. So read through those allowable activities. They are very broad. Most things are billable. Something we didn't touch on was the in-kind paperwork that's not billable anywhere, I think, in the training. But that is vaguely outlined in the manual, but things like writing your contact notes is not billable. But it's very flexible with your notes. Somebody asked for an example, but write your notes the way you feel is appropriate, that captures the allowable activities and what they want to see.
Yeah, and the contact notes too, you can do them kind of in different ways. The completing the contact notes, you can do them per contact, or you can do a monthly note. I personally prefer to do a monthly note. I guess it depends on how many contacts you've had, but I list kind of all my contacts in the monthly note because I bill monthly, and I find that easier to do for me just because of the rounding rule. And that way, you know, and we're going to put some more information on the VABA website about billing. I know that DBHDS and DMAS can't really tell you how to bill, and we can't tell you how to bill either. We can give you some tips that we have found that are not sanctioned by DBS or DMAS or DBHDS, and we will do that on the virginiaaba.org website. But so I do monthly notes. I know other people do contact notes, and I personally bill monthly, although other people have to bill more often depending on how much of this is your income. So it's really a personal thing. And I think, like Darcy says, there's a lot of leeway for that. With the quarterly reports, there's not as much leeway. You've got to do quarterly reports. You've got to include the elements in the quarterly reports, which we're going to talk about a little bit further. And those are updated to the quarterly, not the ISP section, but to the quarterly section where they showed in WAMS. Then you might need to review your services. You may not. You might be finished. Let's say we go in, we do something real quick. We've made a great difference in the individual's lives, which is why I love this service, because sometimes that happens. Sometimes there's some really, just little things that you can do, and it makes a huge difference in this person's life. That's very reinforcing to me. But you may need to renew services and WAMs, or complete a disposition summary. So as they had talked about, it was on slide 22 when Nathan talked about kind of the different types of authorizations that you would do. The initial 180, we'll talk about that. And then you would do, once you've hit your 180, whether or not you've finished all of your assessments or not, you would give the information that you have from your assessments, whatever that would be, to get your next authorization that would go through the end of the person's year, their annual date, and that you would get from the support coordinator, because that's a very specific date. And then you would, if you need more hours, you can request more hours. Let's say, oh, I only asked for 20, but something happened, some behavior changed, and now I need to put in a lot more hours. You can ask for that. Or if you're just continuing the service, you know what, we haven't met all of our goals. We're at our annual person-centered annual renewal date, but I need to continue on with this person. The support coordinator agrees, the individual and the caregivers agree. So that would be another reason to go on. So the other things that you need to do are to retain a client chart with the required paperwork and the signatures and documentation in case you were to be audited. And then also bill for services. And like I said, we're going to maybe give you some more specific tools for that on the website at a later time.
We will, and there is even a question or two in there about denial codes and stuff. And again, not sanctioned by DBHDS, but denial codes are denial codes. So we'll list out what we see regularly and the responses all on the VABA website.
Right. And then we'll put the this video, we'll link to it, and the FAQ that Nathan's going to put together. And so thank you for all those questions. I actually had to turn them off because they were distracting me, so I'm not seeing anything in that. So, okay, so we're in our example. We've got our individual. We're very excited that this individual can really use our help. Let's say his name is George. And we're starting services for George in WAMS. Again, we've already hopefully signed up as a provider. We already have a WAMS login. So if you don't know anything about WAMS, that's a step behind. And You know, Barry has offered to help. We can help you with that. But once you know how to get into WAMs, hopefully, what you're going to do is ask your support coordinator to open a service authorization and assign me, Christy, to the current ISP for George in WAMs. And then you can see these, like when you sign into WAMs, it'll give you some dashboard alerts. What it doesn't do for you or for the support coordinator is like send you an email, hey, you got something going on in WAMs, which means that anytime you do something in WAMs that you want to tell your support coordinator about, it's good to send him or her an email or them an email so that they know what to look for. You know, it's like, oh, I finished this thing that you were asking me for. It's in there, because they don't get an alert. All right, so on the service authorizations tabs, and you can see on the, you can see on the tabs there, it says home, dashboard, my lists, alerts, reports. You can get to service authorizations. You can do a nice little search, which will tell you what you've got going on, especially if you have a lot. If you only have like a couple, you might want to put in their name, search that way. Do you have anything to add on here, Darcy, or should we go to the next? All right, so that's kind of how you start. Then you're going to click on view next to the individual, so you can kind of see once we've gotten to the person's ISP or to their service authorization, you can see on the left hand side it's got that menu. You're going to want to click on view to the next to the individual to get to this screen. And then if you have any authorizations to add, you're going to click that button that says add. Pretty self-explanatory, I think. So when you're starting new services, again, you're going to choose the correct services. That's the first thing. I once chose the wrong code. That really causes a lot of trouble. Don't do that. Listen, you know, learn from my mistake, but you need to choose the one that goes with you. So the 97139 is if you're an occupational therapist, a PT, speech therapist, behavior analyst. It's not behavioral, it's actually behavior analyst. And that's either a assistant behavior analyst, so an LABA, a licensed assistant, or a BCB, I'm sorry, a LBA, a licensed behavior analyst. Both of those would fall under the category of behavior analyst. If you're an LABA, you of course need supervision, and you have to provide, or have to purchase your own supervision or get your own supervision in some way. That's not really billable. That's why LABAs and LBAs, I believe, in my opinion, get the same rate, is because the LABAs also need to get that supervision for them. But that wouldn't be anything that supervisor does not get paid by DBHDS, only the person who's delivering the services. And then if you are a PBSF or an LPC and LCSW, then you would choose 97530. And as they said on slide 32, as Barry said, there's now like this new checkbox where you would click yes. It's behavioral services, assuming that yes, because there are other types of consultation services that people provide. You'd put in the start date. Now you won't be allowed, let's say I met with the person yesterday, I can't, I wouldn't be able to bill for that if I hadn't tried my authorization. So it's a really good idea to go ahead and get the information from the support coordinator and start this information before you meet with any caregivers or anybody to get information, because you won't be able to get paid until you have gotten the authorization. And I think Barry said to wait until the authorization is returned. If you want to roll the dice, you can probably have it in pending, but you certainly cannot start, or you certainly won't get paid for anything that you start if you do it prior to the start date. So there's no backdating, like absolutely no backdating.
And but the pre-authorization people have, I think, usually about a 10-day turnaround. So it's not that long, but if it's an emergency, there's really no pushing it through faster either.
Right. You may just have to start and hope that it works out. But once that date's in there, that can be the date where you would get paid for services. The end date, wait, Darcy, I think would it be the 180 end date if it was the 180, or wouldn't? So it wouldn't exactly be the annual renewal date unless it's your second. Yeah.
Right. So if you're starting services, I Google 180 days from the day I'm starting, and then I subtract one because that seems to be what I'm finding If you
You
go
can do it,
one day
Excel can do
over,
it too.
don't go one day over the 180 days because they'll reduce it. But if it's 180 days, you'd put that 180 day
Date
end
there.
date. And then where it gets confusing, but the behavior guidelines the behavioral guidelines give you some details about this. After the 180 days, you're gonna end up redoing the service off, the part 5 or
Mhm.
interim plan, and all those dates need to match again. That's when you might do a
That's
start
right.
date at the end of the 180 days and then continue the services to the end of their ISP year. We follow the ISP dates that are set by the CSB or the support coordinator.
Mhm. So I think it's probably 180 from the start date. If you include the start date, that's 100.
Yeah.
Yeah, but if you don't include the start date, then it would be 179. The units would be your hours per year. And as they said, we usually, behavior analysts usually deliver services, I think speech and OT and everybody as well, that are 15-minute units. And that would probably be easier and maybe less wasteful, but that's not how it's set up. It's definitely set up for hours per year. So you're going to put in no decimals, as Jason said, no decimals, but the hours per this authorization that you are requesting. And then you're going to need, oh, go ahead.
If I could just add, because I think hours is something that a lot of people in the training or the units we're choosing is a big question. And I bet everybody wants to know how many. And there is no, and Barry hit on this too.
No, we're not telling you.
There's no guideline, but you're providing behavioral consultation. This is not all direct service. You can do some direct depending. So look at your hours and what you're going to need to do the assessment the way that you've determined is the best way to proceed with the assessment based on your credentials and your experience and all that. So there's a lot of flexibility with this.
No, that's a really good point. And I think too, if you're thinking ethically too, we should never be shooting for a certain number of hours. It really has to be based on your experience. And yeah, I think it's only behavior analysts that can deliver the direct service. Is that correct? Yeah. The one-on-one direct, but really it's not meant to be always a one-on-one thing. That's just part of our practice. It's really meant to be consultation. So you decide the number of hours you think makes sense, and then you justify it. So why you want to include what behaviors you're targeting, what the plan is for treatment. Why does the individual need this service? What are you going to do to help them? We can go to the next slide. Thank you. So then you're going to enter the plan for supports in the part 5, or the part, it looks like a V, but it's a Roman numeral 5. The part 5 is our friend. We're not really friends with the other parts. There are a lot of other people who are other providers who use the other parts more closely, but we are really supported, or we're really responsible for the part 5. So that's what we're going to start to do. So we enter our supports. We've got your service and outcome. I think we need to actually, you can put a comment in there. I think we need to go to the next page. Yeah. So if you're already assigned, so when you go in and meet with your support coordinator, you don't go in and meet, you just talk to them on the phone, or even at your annual, if you're renewing the service, sometimes I'll change because their goals will change annually. And so you're going to get assigned to one of the outcomes. You have to know which outcomes. So in part 3 will be the outcomes, but not all of those outcomes apply to therapeutic consultation. As a matter of fact, Darcy is really good at just getting one outcome to apply to therapeutic consultation, which is awesome. I think one is probably a good idea because if you do more than one, then you've got to write goals for each of those. So when we talk about goal, it's really this outcome in part 3 that you are assigned to. And I've noticed that that's generally talked about in kind of the annual meetings. I haven't started somebody new in a while, but anyway, in the annual meetings, we sit around and we go, okay, I fall under that goal, or you fall under this goal, that sort of thing. So where you are assigned to is very important. That's in part 3, but you don't have to play with it in part 3. You go to part 5. And you'll be able to choose that goal from part 3. And actually, you'll only be able to choose the goals to which you are assigned. If the other ones won't be available to you. So if there are no goals available to you, then you need to work with your support coordinator and make sure you're assigned to one. If there are too many, then you may need to be pulled off of them.
Christy.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, I can't remember if we had addressed this or put this somewhere, but the difference between doing a part 5 and an interim ISP.
Yes, yeah.
We show you how to do a part 5 and an interim ISP, but they are technically the same thing. They are both the goals that we'll be providing and the services we'll be providing. The difference is sometimes the ISP and WAMS is closed. We're in the middle of the year, the ISP year, everything's been done and they're adding us as a service. So sometimes they can't, once it's closed, they can't add us to that part 5 that you see on the screen here where there's an add button, it's all closed. That's when we would go in and complete an interim ISP instead, which Christy will show you in a minute. But that's the difference. You wouldn't complete both. It's one or the other. If you can be added to the current ISP, this page, what you see, then use that. That's the easiest and most effective way. If it's closed, we'll show you the interim ISP in a minute.
Yeah, you can go to the next slide, Nathan. So you're going to select add next to the part 5 and then edit to open that plan and then select the edit. So we wanted to give you kind of the page by page. So the yellow boxes are what you're going to enter information for. You've got the effective date. That's the date that the services are starting. That's got to match the service authorization request start date. And then you would choose the correct service in the drop down and you would add the outcome. There we go. And this is what it would look like. So this is really directly from your part 5. The desired outcome would be the outcome that you are a part of. If it's more than one, you're going to have to add a new one. You're going to have to keep adding to this. So you would put the end date. That would be the end of the current service request. So if it's 180 or 179 days from the start, or it's the end of the individual service plan year, or it's no, that's it.
I mean, I guess you could choose to only extend for another 6 months.
Oh,
if
that's
you want.
true. Yeah,
I mean, there's so much flexibility, but
that's true. You can put in whatever you just can't do anything past those two. And then you're going to put in the supports activities. That's the information from the plan for supports that you created for the upload. So you're going to be putting together your plan for supports, which is kind of your behavior plan. And that would be added to the supports activity. By when you can enter, you can put the end of the date. I think if you think that you're gonna, if you have a goal or something that you're doing that has a different end date, you can put a different end date. So if you are say I'm going to meet with this, or I'm going to, I don't know, I can't think of a good thing, but maybe if you're doing assessments or something, they might end earlier than the other thing. So you can put in a different, but you might as well just put in the end date, then you have to worry about it. And then you're going to add the new and it's going to stick it down there, right? So you may need to do multiple of these depending on what your goals are and what outcomes you're assigned to. It says, so if you would add it again and you would repeat, and then you're going to hit submit save. And go to the next one. Yeah, if you don't do that, nothing happens. But also remember that submit save doesn't really very nicely alert the support coordinator. So it's good to tell them, hey, I did this. It's in there. Here's an email. Hi. Okay. Here's the interim plan for supports. So like Darcy said, if you're doing an interim plan because you're kind of in the middle and you've been added late, great. You're going to click create new. You're going to select search on the pop-up menu. And the provider name should appear, then you can select the provider name under there. That's going to populate the yellow provider section, and then you can continue on. So this is again for that interim support, which you may need to do or you may not to. Can we go to,
So these,
one thing I mentioned, go ahead.
Well, we had, just to let everybody know, we put, this is more of like the step-by-step, because while there are some WAMS instructions in the 300-page manual on WAMS, it's for everything WAMS. So this is just once this is sent out later, it should help you with what it should look like in the step-by-step to get completed what you need to complete.
And one thing that I did want to mention is that this is the same as, so can you go back to slide 42, Mr. Nathan? So this is really, again, I know I said it, but I wanted to highlight it, that this is the same as the document part 5. So you're going to be putting together again your plan for supports, and you can just copy and paste in here what you've got. Okay, so 44. Then with it again, like Darcy said, we're just going through step by step so that you have this available to you. You're going to add next to the part 5 plans for supports, edit, so you can open it and enter the information in the yellow boxes. All right, so completing it, you've got the desired outcome. This is like more, it's often the shared outcomes. It can be a new shared outcome. So if you didn't fit in any of the shared outcomes that they had, then you might need to put in something new. And then the life area, that would be based on the shared outcomes. So that'll already be populated in there, and you just choose the one that matches there. You're going to put in your steps to get there, like what's going to happen, the start and end dates that have to match the authorization request, the support activities, the things that you're going to do. And of course, that's based on the activities that you can do in the manual. And then the I no longer need or want supports. I don't think that's required anymore. It used to be required, but it's not required anymore. But it would be kind of your goal, like when my individual is at 0 instances of aggression or.
So Christy, with the I no longer need supports, even though it's not a red asterisk, I think those that are completing it might know that that's where they want us. We did not even think to hit on this. That's where they want your specific goals and outcomes from your behavior plan, everything that you'll be working on listed. So sometimes they'll accept this without you entering that there because there is no asterisk. There are some pre-auths who might kick it back and say that those goals are missing. But again, we're creating a paper document that looks almost exactly like this that we're also uploading, which will have that information too. So
yeah, that's why I've always just left it in there. But it would be, like I said, if, you know, when we are at 0 instances of elopement, or when he's able to contact the environment this way. Yeah, so those are our pretty standard goals, but they are in your services plan. So, but that's a good place to put it. By when, of course, is the date that we just talked about. Then you would add new, and you may need to do multiple if you're under different shared outcomes or have multiple goals. So hopefully this step-by-step will help you as you start new clients and can just go straight through it. So provider and person signatures. This always gets me tripped up. You're going to click on, you can see too, next to signatures, there's a little circle, and the circle is open. And that means that you don't have everything. You see next to services and outcome where the circle is like all colored in. That means you're good. You've done everything, or everything has been done for that area.
And that's throughout all parts of part 5 that we didn't even hit on. Look for that circle that's filled. If not, you're not going to be able to submit it if the circle's not filled blue.
Completely filled blue too. Sometimes it's like half filled if you've done a little bit. Yeah. So you really want to look for that. But you're going to click on, so here where the signatures go, you're going to click on to edit. You're going to put the person or the provider, depending on who's signing it. So you can put written, and then you can put signature on file. And then in relation services, you can also type signature on file, because you will have these signatures in real time, but they can't really necessarily, if you don't have the person with you while you're filling out WAMs, you can't have people sign it. And you're going to add new, and then you would do this signer type. So it's the provider, it would be your signature, and then the person that you're delivering services to, really, who or their guardian. So
I think this section, it's more of a formality to close out the ISP so that we can submit it. You have to submit these 2 signatures the way that, like we've listed it here. If you have a way to get them to sign in the system, I'm sure you can, but I'm not sure anybody has that ability except for like CSVs.
Yeah. I don't know how to do that.
But then you must have these signatures on file. So, and really the only ones that must sign are our paper plan for support part 5, and our current behavior support plan at minimum must be the individual or guardian and the professional providing the service. Those are the 2 signatures. Yeah.
So those are the 2 signatures that you would add here. Unless there's, I don't, maybe there's situations where like
You
somebody else
could.
could be, I guess you can get other people to sign it, but that seems like more work for not little benefit, so. But that's the signatures. I think I saw somebody asking about signatures, and that's really important. And I like that you put that it's really about this is, I'm just kind of saying, hey, I'm done. I've done everything that I needed to do, and it's sort of closing it out and finalizing it. Okay, so talking about uploading documents to the individual support plan. And again, this isn't quarterlies. These are the documents that you need. You select the upload attachments, and then you would select therapeutic consultation, and then you would attach the file. I would personally attach a PDF. I think they will accept other types of files. I always do a PDF because well, I wouldn't say nobody, you can change a PDF, but really PDFs aren't supposed to be changed or messed with. So anyway, it's good to put in a PDF. Everybody can read PDFs. So that's what my little tip. In the comments, you're going to label the document with the individual's first initial and last name. So if it were Darcy that we were treating, it would be D. Creech. And the document name, or J. Doe is here. Initial plan for a supports or schedule or behavior support plan. And those are the two things that you're going to want to upload.
And you'll see in the behavior guidelines document, once you read through it, that this is where you will also upload that final behavior support plan, BSP, after the end of the 180-day assessment. This is also where you always upload the paper version of your, or the document version of your part 5/schedule plan for supports, all interchangeable names. You'd also upload an annual justification if you choose to write an additional justification. This is also where, and you'll see this in the behavior guidelines, at annual reviews, we also upload at least 3 quarters worth of data and data analysis from our services. So all of that will get uploaded this way based on these instructions. And then you can see the note underneath, and Barry shared a specific slide earlier that for quarterly reports,
30.
They go, slide 30, they go in a different section.
That actually, I think slide 30 talked about the paperwork, but they go into a different section but I liked slide 30 because it kind of gave you the paperwork and where it goes.
Right.
And where'd you put the quarterly? Okay, so always save your work, because if you don't, you might lose it. And then click the button to submit to the support coordinator and confirm. But again, that doesn't alert the coordinator. So you may want to send an email saying, especially if you guys are going back and forth on something and putting an email in there. If you're looking for the VIDES, it can be found under the screening assessments. Darcy, go ahead and talk more about what that is and what you need it for. The VIDES.
You know, I'm not going to tell you what VIDES stands for. Somebody else might know, but it's in Virginia. It's an assessment that qualifies individuals for waiver. So it shows different areas, I think 7 or 9 areas of life, and they have to meet certain sections. But it can be used as a little bit of an assessment when, as a consultant, as some history, some information about what they are capable of doing and where their deficits are.
And if you're looking, go ahead.
I just want to pop in the VIDES. It stands for Virginia Intellectual Disability Eligibility Survey.
Oh, that sounds about right. Okay.
Yeah, it took me about a year to remember that.
Okay, Barry, good job.
It is not an assessment. It is an eligibility survey.
Okay.
It's determining whether they meet certain criteria in order to gain access to the DD waiver. You certainly could potentially use some information from there, but it's definitely not an assessment.
Yeah, hopefully you're doing your own assessments.
It's listed under, so don't let that confuse you, because it's listed under screening assessments.
You can find
it is a screening tool.
Right.
It is a screening tool. Yeah, you're right. It is a little misleading when it's under screening assessments. Thank you for pointing that out.
You can find some additional paperwork and information on their information dropdown if you're looking for some more information. And then you can also see any alerts. Like when you open WAMS, when you first get to WAMS, kind of on the right side, you're going to see that dashboard tab. You can see alerts and information if the person said, pending for this reason, or approved or not approved, those kinds of things. That's the staff, they can, you see that stuff on your dashboard, and then you can click directly through it. Although I noticed that if you click it from the dashboard, then it goes away. So it's sometimes hard to go back to it. You have to go find it a different way. We talked about the sections only complete when the little blue circle is filled completely. If it's half blue or it's like an open circle, then you've missed something. And then there's on the WAMS homepage, there's a did you know, a series of tips and tricks, which you can read at your leisure. Right, Barry? Or it'll be fun. And the last, okay. So I was just going to say then you would complete the authorization prior to meeting with the client. Although, like Darcy and I said, that if it were an emergency, as long as you haven't met with the client, you may not have to wait for it to fully come through, but you are taking that chance that it won't be approved. However, at least that date's in the system. Usually you can go and get it. Nothing can be backdated. So don't do anything prior unless you are fine with not getting paid for it. So like we said, the initial authorizations for 180 days, then you're going to meet during that 180 day and perform the assessments. Hopefully, like it may take longer than 180 days to do all the assessments because sometimes people don't get back to you, or sometimes something happens, or the person's hospitalized or something. But whatever you have is what you will upload at that time when you're going to do the next kind of the assessment that comes after, or the authorization that comes after your 180 days, assuming that you need it. I mean, I've actually start and finished assignments within 180 days. So you may not need to do that. But obviously there were slides that that they already talked about the service deliverables and the documentation. I really like, again, slide 30 kind of tells you all the paperwork that you need. And then slide 22, I noted, talks about the different types of authorizations. So the next thing you'll do is you'll upload your secondary plan for supports and schedule. So this is what you have after your 180 days. Hopefully you'll have what you have. I mean, hopefully you'll get all of your assessments done in that time, but if you don't, you're just going to put everything you can in there and keep uploading what you get. You can look at the requirements for the authorizations. Then you'll complete a new service authorization where the number may or may not change, dated from the end of the assessment to the end of the ISP year. So that can get a little bit tricky depending on when you end. I mean, ultimately, let's say I start in June and then I have 180 days, which is 6 months. So it would be December. And then let's say the service authorization date is in February, then I would do something for 2 months and then renew probably in February, assuming my services hadn't met. If it's within a day, I don't know and maybe Barry and Nathan, you can recommend something like, let's say I started my annual or my person's annual is December 6th and I started it on June 5th. Then it would end on, December 5th. Maybe I just start it, I wait a day and I start that. It gets kind of tricky when you're close by. And
So,
also think about your quarterlies. Go ahead.
So I think it is kind of worth addressing, even though it's very confusing, but you may start an assessment, let's say on 10/1, but their annual date is 12/31. Well, you can only request that assessment from 10/1 until the end of their ISP annual year, 12/31, which would be what, 2-ish months, let's say 60 of the 180 days. So then really what you're going to do is for that annual renewal, you may still be in the assessment period. If you're done, you might as well upload everything and then request for the whole year so you can do the training and support. But it's likely maybe after 2 months you're not done. So at that annual date of 12/1 or whatever, you will then extend your assessment. It cannot go more than that 180 days. So whatever you asked for in the first 60, then you'll just ask for 120 at the new years. And then when that 120 is up, you upload all your documents, justify, and then you will then again complete another service auth, part 5, everything to match for the remainder of that ISP year, which will be, for this person until 12/1.
Right. And then if you also the quarterlies, if a quarterly date comes up, the quarterly is not quarterly from your start date. The quarterly is the quarterly of the person's start date. So that's set based on their annual review date.
So you could start a service 2 weeks before their quarterly date. You do complete a quarterly report for 2 weeks.
Which
It's
just won't have
simple.
very much information.
It's simple, but you do need to follow those dates. If not, if you haven't been till now, I'm not sure what the answer is if you've been confused, because I know it's happened to a lot of people. They think the quarterlies go based on when they start. But moving forward, stick with the quarterly dates determined by the person's individual's ISP.
Mhm. Right. And then the quarterly there, if you go back in the slides, it talks about the different things that you need to have in your quarterly report. Again, there's not really a set example for a quarterly report, but if you go through and look at that documentations, you go, okay, I need the person's name, I need this, that's good. And then you'll know what types of information need to go in there. So there's not really a good sample that we
But,
have.
We're going to talk about quarterlies in a couple of slides.
Oh yeah, so we can
Two
go on
slides
that.
ahead, and we'll address like where you find the details, and then you determine the form. You
Mhm. Yep.
develop your form however you want, but there's specific topics to
More
hit on.
details, right. So, okay, if you need the annual ISP renewal, you can continue through and you're going to complete a new part 5, like we said, and a new service authorization request. And that will go from there. Schedule that goal, we already did that. Yep. So you'll create contact notes, and they can be contact by contact, or they can be monthly, which would include all the contact dates. Totally up to you. It's they just need to have certain elements in them, but these are the required information that are listed below. But whether you do them contact by contact or monthly, again, just has to do with your preferences. You'll need the full name or the Medicaid number, and that needs to be at the top of each page. So you can set it, as a header. It needs to be written, signed, and dated on the day that it was provided if it's contact by contact. Now, both monthly and contact by contact include location, the recipient, the amount of time that was spent on the activity, what was accomplished, and the provider's signature. In addition, the quarterly reports and the part 5 and the other documents that are developed also you have to maintain copies of the SIS when completed. So talk about that, because that can be like, we don't really have access to the SIS, but you'll have to get access to the SIS.
Did we address the SIS at all?
We haven't yet.
Nathan,
We talked a
Barry,
little
did
bit about
anybody-
it. I don't think anybody talked about it.
I think it's an important document for
It really is.
all waiver providers to be aware of, because this, I believe, if I'm correct, is an assessment. Is it?
It is an assessment, yes, and it's critical that providers know the information in there, because it informs the part 3, the outcomes, and the part 5 with support activities and in support instructions within the part 5. So you can contact your support coordinator to make sure you get a copy of that, or at least get a summary of it, because I believe there's a summary document you can get. Because
To
that
be included in the meetings is helpful, right, Barry? I mean, I like to be included
Yes.
in the SIS meetings, because there are things about your individual that's really helpful for that. It really does each time they do it, and they do it, is it every 3 years?
Changed.
Yeah. It's changed around, so and it's not within my world anymore. So
Yeah, it changed to 2 now or something. I think they were.
No, I think they extended it.
Oh, they
extended,
extended it.
went
Oh,
farther out. But
Okay.
you as a provider should attend, and I know that is something that you don't get paid for, but you can provide critical information, make sure that assessment is accurate.
Mhm. So we were talking about quarterlies, and Barry reviewed some of the slides about the quarterlies. Slide 30 has the requirements. But I did want to bring out the quarterly information. So this is from in the chapter 6, quality management, which is kind of an odd place for you to find quarterlies, but that's where it is. And it says that the person center reviewed for each service, including support coordination, case management, were reviewed to determine if it addresses the effectiveness of any significant events the individuals and when appropriate, the family or caregiver satisfaction with the services and other input, changes in the desired outcome, support activities or instructions when they are ineffective or upon the individual's request. So these are things that you want to address in your quarterly. The effectiveness, any significant events that happen, your caregivers, and if you can get the individual satisfaction or dissatisfaction with your services or any other input they have on the services. And then any changes that happen, desired outcomes, support activities, instructions, if they are ineffective, like let's say, oh, we were doing this, but that didn't work. So now we've changed to this, or the individual requested, I don't like this. Okay, we're going to move to this then.
And in addition, in chapter 4, specifically for behavior consultation only, the quarterly reviews must also include graph data and a summary of the data. But that is, so if there are other therapeutic consult providers on the training, not just behavioral, I believe that's a specific to behavioral, the graphed data every quarter. And then if I can't remember if Barry hit on this, but it is on that slide with the details. We have to show evidence that it has been, the support coordinator has received it within 10 days of the due date of the quarterly report. Hence the reason we upload them in WAMs now, because it's time stamped, no questions.
Yeah. But again, it's still nice to email your support coordinator, say, hey, quarterly is in there. I like to include too the number, the contact days that I saw the person. So there's definitely there's not a template for a quarterly. Those are the things that you have to have in their graph data, but you can also put other information that you think might be useful to you when you are assessing your services with the client. Because if you think about that, that's what the quarterly is serving to do, for you to look at it and go, okay, we're in the right direction or we're not. For DBHDS to look at it and go, okay, you're going in the right direction or not. Whatever information you think might be important, and it might be some information is important for one client and not so much for another. So you can request more hours if you need it. You would end your authorization and request a new one. So let's say you've run out of hours. Oh, I requested 20, but I need this, something's going on and I now need 40. You're going to end your authorization and request a new one for additional hours. And then you would have to justify it.
And you request new hours. It's use it or lose it. So if you have only used 19 of your previous 20, but you don't want to cut it too close, then you lose that one extra hour and then you start the new hours.
So you may want to ask for 21, whatever you think that you need. Yeah. So it's the new hours that you need on that.
And there is no way other than yourself to keep track of the hours you have other authorized and used. You can see what you have authorized in WAMs because it's right there. What you don't know is what you've used. And I think everybody's asked throughout the years, how do we know? Can I go back and look? But you're just going to have to go through your contact notes and your billing and add it all up and see what
I do. Because I bill monthly. I have it in a database where I keep track of it, because you do want to, you're like, oh, I don't want to get up to the end, especially towards the end and be like, how many hours have I used? Yeah, that's a really good point. So hopefully you've done such a great job that they no longer need you. And a lot of times it's really hard to deliver that news. And sometimes you have to be like, look, I love working with this individual, but I'm kind of superfluous. The supports that are there are appropriate, and it's really time to end my consultative services, although I'm always available for you in the future. Barry reviewed some slides on ending services earlier in the presentation that you can go back and look at it. But you need to discuss service termination with the team, so they can't be surprised. And then you actually need to write a 10-day written notice to the support coordinator and team saying, hey, I'm going to end my services. So that needs to be 10 days prior to that. And then you need to write your written disposition summary, which again, we don't really have a template for, but there are only 4 things that are needed there. So as long as you have these headings, you're in good shape. What strategies you utilized, what objectives you met, maybe what objectives you didn't meet if that was, but went away for some reason. Because if you haven't met objectives, then you probably should still continue services unless they went away, which would be under unresolved issues. And then what your recommendations are going forward. So you would send that disposition to the support coordinator within 30 days. And then you might want to document how you sent it. Hey, I emailed this in the person's file, or I faxed it, or but that would somehow need to get sent to the support coordinator. That would not be uploaded to WAMS, correct? There's really no place to, can you
It's
upload it?
challenging to
Yeah.
upload it in WAMS
There's not
after
really-
you have
Oh, that's
closed,
true. If you've closed, there's no,
Right.
you don't have access. Yeah.
unless the ISP is still open. It's very confusing. Sometimes you can get access in WAMS. I mean, that's ideal. So I would suggest you write the disposition almost right away and just upload it in WAMS right when you close the case. But if not, email it or fax it to the support coordinator. They need to have it in their records.
Mhm. All right. So, the last part, I just wanted to say that we are going to be putting a lot of stuff on the VABA website, including this presentation, a link to DBHDS's presentation, because of course they're hosting this, and a huge thank you to Nathan for really putting this together, and Barry and Jason. Like, you know, I think it was Jason said in the beginning, like, Nathan's been amazing and really great to have all of this partnership, because we just wanted to make sure that providers were getting help in how to do this service, which can be a little bit tricky. But all of this will be up on DBHDS's website. And then also we will link to that at the virginiaaba.org website. We'll put the FAQ when that comes out, and then there's some other tips and things like that for billing, and then maybe some locations of key information for you. Another really great resource is that we have a Facebook page. If you are a member, I will put that, I guess I can put that on the website as well, but you're certainly welcome to join the Facebook page, people to get together and talk. I think that Liz is running that meeting
Yeah.
now. Yeah.
Sorry,
and they get
Liz, we're
together
going to
and talk.
inundate you. With
Yeah, they get
new
together
members.
and talk with that. But if you find it on Facebook, it's like Virginia Therapeutic Consultation.
Yeah.
Maybe Liz can put the link in the thing.
I'll do that in
but-
just a sec. If you give me a second, I'll drop the link.
Okay. But that's a really great resource as well. And you know, what we wanted to do is to make sure we heard this information from the mouth of DBHDS and DMAS, because they are the authorities. And sometimes I think that when people ask questions, especially on social media, somebody will ask a question and somebody else will answer it, and it's not always the right answer. So it's good to have the right answers from Nathan and Barry and Jason, and we will have those out there.
I just want to jump in as we're wrapping things up and thank everybody that attended, and in particular, Christy, Darcy, Jason, and Barry. You guys are making me blush with the kind statements that you made about me trying to, shepherd this through, but it wasn't just me. It was a very minimal part, just a lot of cutting and pasting on my end. It was you guys doing all the work and honestly doing most of the talking. So I really appreciate the effort. As Christy said, we've recorded it. We're going to take all of the questions that were in the chat, collate them, come up with an FAQ. We'll get that out. And as soon as possible, it does take a little bit of time to do that, but we'll get that out as soon as possible. I also want to note that we try to do trainings about once a quarter. Typically, they're not like on an administrative overview topic like this, but it might just be more related to functional behavior assessment, behavior support planning, or behavioral science in general. So the best way to get notified about those is to make sure that you have registered through that constant contact link that Barry referenced earlier in the training. So make sure you check that out. Just fair warning, you will get updates about a lot of other things that are not related to the service as well, but it might be pretty informational for you to get that type of info also. I believe that that's probably it at this point as we wrap it up. I just wanted to note one last thing, though, is that the team at VABA is putting together a survey that's related to the service, and that'll go out to members. So be on the lookout, VABA members.
Yes,
And-
thank you. I'll put that out. And I'll probably put it out on Facebook too for people who are doing therapeutic consultation. So if you're not a member, you can find it out on our social media. But that information will be useful to, hopefully, because we're going to share that information back with DBHDS.
Thank you, guys. I really appreciate it. And I'll just end by saying thank you for your time. I hope everybody has a wonderful rest of their day, and I look forward to seeing you further on up the road. You've got our emails, so feel free to shoot us an email in the time between now and when the information gets posted, or anytime subsequent to that as well. So I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording at this point and bid you all adieu. Thank you so much.